how optimistic or pessimistic are you about an Elon Musk takeover of Twitter? Do you think he is going to successfully address all the issues that you've been pointing out with the virality of information and the fracturing of the media ecosystem and clickbait outrage? Do you think he's going to be good for this problem, or neutral, or bad?
Well, first, it sounds like he's not actually going to buy it. I listen to my colleague Scott Galloway, who I think is incredibly insightful on all things about business and society and technology. And it sounds like, of course, he made a bid. It was too high. Maybe he'd like to get a lower price, but the Twitter board is unlikely to say, okay, you screwed us once. Sure, you can have it. So he's probably not even going to buy it. But as a thought exercise, so the way that I look at it is there are two things. There's content moderation, and then there's everything else. Content moderation is, you have to do it. The question is, do you do a little more or a little less? And if Elon were to take over, he would do it less. You have to do some, otherwise everything becomes porn and Nazis, and you can't, as a lot of early 1990s web platforms found, you can't have no moderation. You have to have some. So the only question is people on the left are horrified because Elon's going to do less content moderation. This is going to be horrible. He's going to lower it. And then people on the right are like, yay, Elon's, I'm sorry, people on the right are like, yay, Elon's going to lower it. So so that's half. That's half of. That's 90% of the discussion. It's 10% of the reality. Content moderation is actually not very important.
Right.
The problem with the web, with the internet, especially with social media, is not that there is bad stuff. It's not that someone can say that Biden and Pelosi are eating babies. The problem isn't that someone can say that, and we don't have a government agency that will stop them. The problem is someone can say that, and it can get out to millions of people within a day or two, because right now the incentives are the more of an asshole you are, and the more extreme what you say is, the more successful you are. And those incentives are insane. Like, it's insane that this is our public square with these horrible, horrible incentives. So let's leave content moderation, because that's hopeless. Republicans and Democrats will never, ever agree. So unless one party gets 60 votes and 60 senators, nothing will go through Congress. Okay. Now let's move over. Let's look at everything that matters, which is the architecture, the dynamics. It's all about the architecture. That's what pushed us over the cliff. That's why everything is going haywire. It's the architecture. And there are a bunch of things about the architecture. One really important one, which I talked about in my essay, was verify users. You can't just walk up to a bank with a paper bag full of money and say, please open an account for John Q. Smith. You can't do that. Banks have duties to know their customers. And while I'm not saying the internet should do that, I do think that giant platforms that affect our society, that have a huge impact on our politics. So if you have, 10 million people on your platform, whatever, you have some number of people, you now are a systemically important platform that affects our democracy, and you can't just let a Russian agent open 1,000 accounts a day. Like, we're not going to, on a tiny platform, we're not going to stop you. Russian agents can do what they want on small platforms. But if you're Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, you can't just let Russian agents open 1,000 accounts. You have to actually say, not give me your driver's license, but you say, okay, you've opened an account, and that allows you to see what's going on. You can do that with a fake name, do whatever you want. But if you want to post, if you want to be able to put things out there to get amplified, possibly to the moon, possibly to millions of people, if you want that privilege, then you have to go out and get verified. So we're going to kick you over to either a private company or a nonprofit, or maybe there's a network. There can be, because there's lots of different ways to verify identity. You could show driver's license. You could get networks of other people to vouch for you. There's a scheme right here at NYU. I'll find the name. An NYU grad student developed a scheme about how you can identify people, and then you can erase the information, so it's not held, but you've authenticated them, and you pass that back to, say, Facebook, to say, yep, he's been verified. He's old enough to use the platform. Because we got to keep 11-year-olds off Instagram. This is insane that they can do anything they want if they lie about their age. So user authentication and age verification, those are incredibly important. Elon might do that. He tweeted, or whatever, he said, authenticate all humans. So that just means at least, make sure there are no bots. But I think if you go a step further and say, at some point in the process, you have to show that you're a real person and that you're old enough to use the platform. If you just do that, now you can still use a fake name. You don't have to use your real identity. That solves a huge number of problems. It gets rid of almost all the bots, and it reduces some of the troll-like behavior. So would Elon do that? Maybe, and that would be a huge, huge benefit. Then there's a lot of other stuff about reducing virality, which I don't think Elon would do. I think he would use a very light touch. He would get rid of bots, and he would do less content moderation. He would allow Trump back on. I think those are the three big things that he would do.
Okay, so I have to let you go. Just final question on that. How do we get that? Because these companies always have an incentive to boost engagement because they're on the ad model. They're not going to self-regulate. Are we going to have a heavy hand with the law and make them do these things? Are we going to get out in the streets and protest until they feel culturally pressured to?
Yeah. So when people think regulation, it's amazing. What everybody thinks is a government agency that's going to look at what's posted. They decide, is this true? Ministry of Truth. Like, no. What we mean by what I argue for is that there needs to be a regulator. Right now, there is no regulator. There is no government agency that has the purview here. There's the FTC, which can rule on antitrust issues. But antitrust issues is a very small piece of what's going on here. There's nobody that can really look at what's happening and say, what you're doing is really damaging kids. In the UK, they have that. It's called Ofcom, or I forget what that stands for. But in the UK, there is a regulatory agency. And so Senator Bennett of Colorado has proposed a bill. We need a regulatory agency that has enough specialization, enough knowledge that they can actually look at the overall view and be the regulatory body. Now, they'd have very severe limits by the First Amendment that they can't ever say, yes, no about posting. They're not going to make decisions about who gets to say what. Everything has to be viewpoint neutral. But there are certain things about the architecture that make us vulnerable on national security because it's an open book for Russian agents and anyone else who wants to make us hate each other. There's no age verification, which is, we didn't even talk about what's happening to teens in this conversation. Because there is no oversight body in the government that can make them do anything. So I think we need a government regulator that can look at it, decide what needs to be done, and also what do we need to do before we even know what can be done. And so there are two bills. One is the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act, written by Nate Priscilli at Stanford, that simply says there has to be a mechanism by which these companies share their data. It would go through the National Science Foundation. They would designate the process by which de-identified data will come from the platforms through NSF or NSF certified researchers, so that at least researchers can know what's going on. We have no idea what's happening. So our kids, the depression, suicide rates are doubling, and we have no idea what they're doing. We have to rely on self-report studies like, how many hours of social media did you watch? Like, we have these big studies that are with terrible data, but Instagram has the data. They know exactly what my daughter watched and then how my daughter doesn't have Instagram, but they know exactly what a kid does, and then they know how the kid's mood is in the minutes afterwards. They have that information. So we need platform accountability. We need to raise the age of internet adulthood. It's now 13, and there's no enforcement. You can just lie. We need to raise it to 16 or 18 and have enforcement. And then that's what we need to do at the federal level. We probably will never get it because our Congress is so dysfunctional, and it's dysfunctional in part because social media has made it even more dysfunctional than it used to be. But the UK Parliament is actually doing some really good work. They have actually already passed an age-appropriate design code. So that's going to force the platforms not to age verify, unfortunately, but it is going to force them to just take account of the fact that you've got kids on your platform. So like, don't be pinging them at midnight. Don't be sending them alerts at midnight to check, oh, somebody liked your photo. So there can be some little tweaks to make it more humane for kids. The state of California is considering passing almost the exact same UK code. So if UK and California pass it, the platforms are going to have to do it globally. They're not going to be able to have different platforms in Colorado and California. So there is a lot we can do to pressure the platforms. I think that there are a lot of lawsuits going ahead. A lot of girls in particular, they were not depressed and anxious before they got on Instagram, and then within a year they killed themselves. So there are a lot of lawsuits going on of parents. I know I've spoken to some of the lawyers. Parents who are suing Facebook, Meta, because of what, and it's not because of what the key is, it's not because of what they saw, because Section 230 protects the platforms. Section 230 has been very broadly construed by the courts to give them, you can't sue Facebook because your kids saw something on Facebook, but I think you can, or Instagram, but I'm hopeful that these suits will succeed because it's not the thing they saw, it's the design. The design is unsafe at any speed for children. So there are a lot of ways to put pressure on the platforms through lawsuits, through states attorneys general, through federal legislation, state legislation. And at some point, what we want is that the companies will actually think, should we do this thing? Or if we're going to mess up kids even more, are we going to get caught? Are we going to get in trouble for it? And until now, the answer has always been, who's going to catch us? What are they going to do to us? Tell us to stop? So I am hopeful that it'll take a variety of kinds of pressure, and then eventually there will be pressure on the platforms. And I hope also from the employees. I hope the employees will start standing up saying, we shouldn't be doing this.